Okay, and we're back. So it's been a couple of squares since last time. I did record a video for Square 6, but it was so short in terms of showing feature stuff that I figured I might as well just kind of bundle this into one. So I did release a small video on my YouTube about an issue with my spawner, where it was spawning hundreds of cubes in seconds, or enemies in seconds. Really funny, so I thought I'd just put it up for the public because it was just kind of a funny moment. And I was actually really impressed with how Unity held together. So, Square 7, where are we at? You'll notice now that we don't have any enemies on the screen at the start, but that's because we spawn them in automatically. So it's just like a random range around the player. If I was to kill an enemy, we'll note that an enemy spawns kind of close to me there. We have a couple of other features to talk about, like we have mouse over text now for items. So you see this says wooden sword. It's not perfect, but the text does follow the camera. It points towards the camera at all times. So yeah, it seems to be a bit based on where the sword initially landed rather than where it ends up. So we are going to have to figure that out. But you can still pick up the item, and that kind of gets into your inventory, which we have visualized. So if I push I, we have an inventory, and you can see we have a wooden sword in there, and we have 4 gold. And just to confirm, 4 gold was added into our wallet just now. The way the spawner works is it just keeps 5 enemies in the game at all times. So if I go to my game controller, which has all our controller scripts on, we have an enemy spawner here. So we have references to the player. We have a max enemy count, so I can dynamically change this. We have an enemy prefab, so this is just the enemy we're going to spawn in. Eventually this will be an array of enemies, maybe a set kind of enemy kind of batch, or I'm trying to think of the correct word, but yeah, you could spawn in bunches of enemies from a sets of bunches. And here we have an enemy list. It looks like an array, but it's actually a list because we want to dynamically change the size, so you always go to list. And this is kind of all the active enemies in the scene currently. And what the script does is it checks if there's 5 enemies in the scene. If there's not, if there's less than 5, it will go ahead and spawn one in. This was the key issue that we weren't checking with the original enemy spawner. We were never adding, when we spawned enemies in, we never added them to this list. So the max, the enemy count was always 0. So it just kept spawning in enemies non-stop. So if I go ahead and kill an enemy, we'll note that a new enemy spawns in almost automatically. The old enemy is removed and a new enemy is added to the list. It's very quick, and we'll note if we open our inventory up, we have more gold and we have a second wooden sword. These are buttons. They currently don't do anything, but yeah, I imagine at some point when we have an equip screen, we will look to like just be able to right-click a button and then that will automatically equip something or de-equip it, and I'll get these buttons kind of lined up a bit better, so they don't just kind of what they're doing is trying to make effective use of all the space. So if I was to kind of go ahead and kill another enemy and pick it up, you can see it's still using effective space. It's just spreading the buttons around equally. And in theory, if we get enough buttons along, we should be able to scroll this kind of UI. But yeah, it's not fully working. But everything kind of works. The only thing that doesn't kind of work fully at the moment is I don't update the inventory whilst it's open. So you have to kind of refresh the inventory. That's something I probably should just do whenever a player picks up an item or gold, is just to send an update through and then it'll be fine. But yeah, everything else still works. As you see, we killed 4 enemies, we have 4 swords, we have some gold. We're currently level 2. We've been reset to 0 XP and we need 200 for the next level. And 5 enemies are always on our screen at once. So we have, in theory, a really basic game loop at this point. Players can go into the game, they can kill enemies, they get loot for it, they have an inventory to see that loot, and enemies keep spawning in. And as they kill enemies, the player levels up, and the enemies level up as they level up as well. So the enemies always stay somewhat relevant, in theory. So yeah, that's kind of how we're going. As you can see, we're doing more damage now. It took us 3 hits to kill that enemy. But yeah, so that's kind of where we're at the moment. Next is I've got 2 things I want to do for this kind of core action section to be done. The first is to give the enemies a little bit of AI so they move around just a little bit. The second would be to have an equipment screen or equip screen, so we could take these swords and equip them on the player. So I'll probably just have like a weapon, a chest armor piece, and a helmet, just like 3 really basic slots. And I'll get more items added to the drop table, so the enemies start dropping random items, and then we'll get equipping going, and maybe we'll even try and visualize it on the player cube, so we can see when a player equips a sword on the equip screen that we should have a sword visually on the cube, just to indicate that that's happening. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at. Square 8 will probably be the equip screen, because I think I'm looking forward to getting that done more. And then Square 9 is probably enemy AI, and Square 10 will be the initial action concept kind of done, at least the initial concept. There are other things we'd like to do, like procedural generation for the level. That's something I've never done before, so learning that's going to be interesting. So just creating a world that's kind of self-contained but has tiles. It feels just a bit different, so it kind of spawns in, you know, trees and terrain just kind of randomly to make it feel a bit more cool. And then maybe adding a boss at the end. And making enemies actually attack back as well. There's lots of little things to do in this kind of action sequence or action prototype before we kind of move on to the metagame part of the game, where we kind of do the town building and defense stuff in the background. But yeah, so far so good. Progress has gone well so far in week 1.